everyone. Can you guys hear me? My
Yes.
name is Saksha Dalal and I am a student coordinator. And today I will be facilitating the session for the Center of Teaching, Research and Learning. And on behalf of the CTRL, I would like to welcome you all to the session, which is program assessment. Oops. Can you guys still see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank God. Program assessment from the ground up, which is the strategies for efficient faculty-led assessments. And there are a few things that I wanted to mention before the start of the session. One is that captioning is available for this session. So to turn on captions, there should be an option at the bottom of the screen in the Zoom toolbar that says shows subtitles. If you do not see it, you may need to click on more to see that option. Second, there will be a brief question answer portion at the end of the session, during which you can use the raise hand function or type a question in the chat box. Our CTRL facilitators are happy to post the questions on your behalf. And finally, there will be an anonymous survey posted at the end of the session as a QR code that you can scan with your phone. And there will be also a link in the chat. CTRL appreciates any feedback because it helps us improve our programming and helps us better support the AU faculty. With that being said, I turn it over to the presenters, and thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sakshi, for your introduction for us. Let me get my screen shared here and we'll get started. And okay, here we go. My name is Mike Cabot. I am from the Writing Studies program in the Department of Literature in CAS. I am thrilled to be joined by colleagues really from across campus, including Jenny Axe from Chemistry in CAS also, Kimberly Cowell-Myers from Government and SPA, Tracy Spesia from the School of Education, and we'll be joined kind of asynchronously and virtually by Doga Eralp from the School of International Service here shortly. And let me kind of get to kind of our agenda. After sharing, of course, who we are, in a moment, I'll actually share a short poll that I'd like everyone to participate in to kind of get your kind of thoughts on where you stand in terms of program assessment. In a moment, I'll speak about the goals for this session. Then we're going to have each member of the panel kind of, well, first I will share some best practices in the kind of assessment of student learning at the program level. And then each member of the panel will kind of share their own kind of experiences with assessment work in their own individual programs and departments. And that will kind of give you a sense of the different ways that this work is done in different programs in terms of size, in terms of kind of speciality and focus. We will then have an opportunity to ask some questions from the individual panel members and get their insights into other pieces of this puzzle. Let me actually, I don't know how I can get to it from here. Everyone can see my screen, right? I'm not finding, okay. Sakshi, can you post the poll for us?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
if you could post that, that would be fantastic to have that be a starting point. And what we're, okay.
Can I do it now?
Yeah, go ahead and do it now, sure.
Okay.
And again, what we're asking is, how is your program or your department organized for the assessment of program learning outcomes? Again, there's a number of options here that you have a committee, maybe you have one faculty or staff member that kind of leads that assessment work in your program. Maybe that all faculty participate in that work and it's kind of just spread around. Maybe you don't know. Or if or how you complete program assessment work, or you may be in a role where that's not necessarily applicable. I know we have people joining us from a variety of different kind of positions from around campus. So we'll give everyone a moment to kind of participate here. It looks like we have a lot of participation there, so which is great. I'll end the poll in just maybe 5 seconds or so after everyone's had a chance to participate here. Okay. Let me share the results. It looks like in a lot of cases, maybe one faculty or staff member leads that work. In a lot of programs, we do have one person that responds that they have an assessment committee. A couple don't know, and of course a little bit of not applicable. This really interesting, and we're going to hear from a variety of kind of experiences from members of the panel on the different ways that their program kind of handles this work. So let me start off by framing this with kind of our goals. We want to share some best practices for program assessment structures and methods that really help inform curricular development improvement. I think that's really the goal for any good assessment program, is to really have it shape and inform the teaching that we do and the curriculum that we provide, right? We'll also work to identify structures and methods for program assessment that really value faculty time and labor, right? That are not just kind of, that are not only useful, but are mindful of all the other kind of responsibilities and commitments that we have, both in terms of teaching and in terms of scholarship. We will discuss some strategies for building support structures that can help guide that faculty work. Based on a variety of kind of programs in terms of their size, their resources, and so forth. And of course, we'll answer any questions that you have about this assessment work. Before we get too far into it, though, let me identify a few kind of key terms that are important for us to kind of think about. One is in terms of simply when we say the word assessment, right? There's a couple different kinds of assessment that we might think of when we hear that term. The first is what we would call grading, right? Classroom assessment. That's the assessment of student learning within the confines of a single class. This may, of course, lead to changes when you do that grading in your own teaching, right? In your own pedagogy or your own course. What we're really focused on here is more program level assessment or program assessment. That involves the department, the program, general education, or the institution itself. And that's an assessment of student learning through a program's learning outcomes to lead to possible curricular revision, refinement. It's a term that I'll talk about in a moment called closing the loop. When we say learning outcomes, that may be what we call goals for a program, objectives. At the program level, of course, these are the things that you want every student to achieve by the end of their kind of program, right? And this phrase closing the loop is a really common one in assessment scholarship to describe how a program actually uses the information they gather from assessment work to either maybe reaffirm their curriculum, to refine it, to revise it, maybe to change it completely, or other elements of the program as well, whether that be course sequencing, whether that be the content of courses, and so forth. So if you had a chance to view the trailer video for this session, which I feel like we crafted like 3 months ago, it was only like a month ago maybe. Part of the mention there and part of the mention, the pitch here is that we have the Middle States accreditation process in process right now happening at AU. We're already in planning stages for our self-study. That self-study work will be happening over the next couple of years. And so all this is underway. So it's a fair question to ask, well, how does that frame the work of assessment kind of broadly and even for us individually? Well, I believe there are 7 standards now, and I could be corrected. It's down from more that there used to be. They've been combined. But standard 5 is about educational effectiveness assessment, right? And the key points here I've kind of bolded. I've exerted part of this under those standards. And the Middle State says that an accredited institution possesses and demonstrates the following attributes or activities. That you define meaningful curricular goals, that this assessment, I should actually back up, is conducted by faculty, right? That it is faculty driven and participation is from faculty, that faculty define meaningful curricular goals, right? With kind of standards and methods for an evaluation of whether or not those goals are being met. Also that it should be, data driven, that you should be collecting evidence on the extent to which students are meeting those academic goals, right? And also that you communicate the results of that assessment to stakeholders. I think that those stakeholders are as small as students and faculty in the program to the wider college and department and university, and then of course to accreditors at that level. They also say that an accredited institution should have a consideration and use of assessment results for improvement of educational effectiveness. So this is what they're interested in, that you have faculty-led assessment that is focused on what students should be able to achieve, what those outcomes are, and that you are using those to improve pedagogy, curriculum, to revise and review academic programs. So what are the best practices in making this actually just a fruitful practice for a program and not simply something to meet an accreditation standard? I think that's the really kind of key question framing all of this work. In Barbara Wolverd's assessment Clear and Simple, she says the good news about this is that creditors are actually asking for things that follow from very natural and scholarly questions. You know, what do we want students to be able to do? What are our goals, right? When they complete our course of study, what do we want them to be able to achieve? That's the learning objectives. How well are students achieving those goals, right? And what factors are influencing the learning? That's the information or the data that we gather. I mean, I'm in humanities, so I like the word information. Data scares me, right? That word data, I go, but information, I'm like, okay, I can see that, right? Action, how can we use this information to improve student learning, right? That's the closing the loop step. That's what we're being asked to kind of show, is that we're doing this kind of work, right? And that it's informative and useful in our own kind of pedagogical and scholarly work. So there are a number of best practices, and we'll be hitting on these as we talk with individual members of the panel and other presenters. But this is actually from the, there's a lot of agreement across the board. This is from the APA Board of Educational Affairs Task Force from 2002, where they say encourage department ownership to drive the process. They too are talking about the importance of having faculty kind of lead this, and that it should grow out of the fundamental questions the faculty have about their own teaching, about their own contributions to the program's success, right? That you are identifying clear, measurable kind of outcomes and expectations, right? And that those are kind of shared explicitly with students and help guide both the teaching and the learning happening in the program. And again, that you are interpreting and using assessment results, right? And that they're used as a stimulus for growth and renewal and improvement, you know, and not, let's say, for, you know, individual personnel decisions or things like that, but it's really driving kind of growth and curricular development. From our own program assessment guidelines that you can find on the website, and I'll show these links later, from the Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, plans should be simple and they should be doable, right? That you should be creating plans that can be implemented and given the usual constraints of fact availability and funding. We'll talk about the ways that these cycles can happen, but often it's not trying to do everything in 1 year or one session, but stretching it out over a 3 to 5 year cycle. And again, plans should be useful. The ideal plan is one that helps the department focus on issues that are of critical importance to it. Those questions that you have that should be driving that assessment work, right? I found this great quote also in Wolverd's book that is from 2010, but it feels like it's talking about this very moment, right? And the contexts that we're in. In times of severely limited resources, we need assessment more than ever. When money is tight, time is stretched to the limit, and we're at our wit's end. I was like, hello, right now. We should not be saying we don't have time or resources to do assessment. Instead, we should be saying, let's use well-conducted assessment to help us achieve our aims most efficiently in this difficult time. So I think that's the question that's going to be kind of posed to my colleagues here, is how, you know, what do they see as kind of well-conducted assessment that's efficient and useful and making good use of that time. And so to start that sharing, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Our colleague Doga is currently traveling, and so he sent along a short video to kind of share his experiences and thoughts on assessment. So I'm going to share that, and then we'll have the other panelists also speak. All right. So let me get that up, and again, share a different screen. And let me make sure I'm sharing sound with you all. Okay, cool.
Hi everyone, this is Doga from the International Peace and Conflict Resolution Program at School of International Service. I'm sorry I can't be in person at least online at this really interesting conference as I'm currently traveling across the Atlantic, but I have recorded this video. Hopefully I'll be able to respond to some of the interesting questions that may at one point lead to a further discussion. So kind of to recap our own experience of assessment within our program, we have an assessment committee composed of 2 faculty members, and one faculty member along with my colleague, in this particular instance is me, have led the assessment work, but we also did get in touch with the other critical faculty members to participate in the work. So far, over the duration of the past 2 years, we have seen, at least in my own experience, the assessment really improving our way of understanding how much students improve in terms of meeting our learning objectives in their own experiences and growing during their time being spent in our master's program, which is in average around 2 years. What made this quite efficient is actually having a very agile team. So having only 2 faculty members that constantly is in touch with the other faculty members saved a lot of time, and we managed to basically coordinate our work very much in conjunction with one another. Of course, there have been certain challenges. One of the most important challenges was the shift to online teaching, and we had to re-navigate our assessment approach in terms of measuring the learning outcomes with a particular focus on the course work's own learning objectives. For that matter, we had decided to pick 2 very important courses that all students have to take in our program and evaluated the impact, and then currently we are developing our own assessment strategy by adding another a practice-based course and its assessment. The reason we had decided to move ahead with focusing on the 2 or 3 common courses is our students decide to pursue their own concentrations within our master's program, and our faculty is very much I call it well versed in pursuing their own research and teaching interests. Yet these 3 courses, meaning the seminar 1 that focus on the theory and seminar 2 which focus on the practice of conflict resolution, along with the practicum and SRPs or master thesis that students are expected to complete their programs, we look into ways through which we could measure growth and development of our students from the point of entry till the point of departure from our program. Each year at the end of the spring semester, we have a retreat, faculty retreat, where we actually have a long drawn out discussions. Generally takes around a few hours, where we look into the assessment of our work over the duration of the past academic year. We hadn't done it last year due to the whole pandemic challenge, but we're going to be convening again this May and gonna do a kind of a overview of what goes well and what certain expectations may be that may bring in more positive change for our students. And the very fact that our program's institutional culture allows for flexibility is also our advantage in terms of our assessment. We allow for our faculty to see the results of our assessment and have conversations how to better build on these results. I can go more on this, but due to our limited time, I'll just leave this rest of the discussion to my colleagues, and hopefully we'll see everyone later. Enjoy.
All right, I'll stop sharing there and virtually thank Doha for his contributions. And there's things that I'm sure we'll pick up about that closing the loop and what Doha talked about the various ways they bring these results back. So we can come back to that too. But let me go ahead and pass things off to Jenny Axe, who's going to talk about work in her program.
Thanks, Mike. So yes, I'm Jenny Axe from the Department of Chemistry. We have a relatively small department, as far as I'm aware. I don't know what the comparative sizes are, but we're between 10 and 15 faculty members. Typically, one person does spearhead the overall assessment, but what has made it a success is they get input from pretty much all the faculty, even if they don't play a major role in writing up the annual report. But one example is, as a science, we care a lot about the application type questions. So can you just use an equation that we gave you, but can you use like 6 equations and combine them to create something new? So our freshman classes, we track how students score on application-based points. And then up in the senior level classes, we do the same, hoping to see improvement with the understanding that the freshman classes won't have as many application style questions. They'll just have a few, whereas for the upper level classes, they're pretty much all application questions. So that's one example of faculty across different sections all participating. So we have 4 intro level classes. So typically 4 instructors will be tracking their own scores. And then we have several advanced classes as well. So a lot of the data comes from all of the faculty as opposed to just one individual who kind of compiles everything. Other methods we've used, we have an alumni survey and general student survey as far as how the students see themselves. For the alumni, we focus on how well prepared they were for the life of chemistry after graduation. We look at presentations, written quizzes, exams. Most of our stuff, as you can see, is very quantitative. So a lot of our reports are very quantitative, but you certainly don't have to only do quantitative things for assessment. I think that's pretty much, as a small department also, we don't necessarily, we might take several years to assess one thing because we just don't have enough data points to get a real understanding of how well the students are prepared. So I think that's about everything.
Great, thanks, Jenny. I'm going to have us turn next to Kimberly Cowell-Myers to share her experience with assessment.
Thanks, Mike. Reminders of what I need to get figured out by by Tuesday when I get back in the classroom. So I'm hoping you all are able to see my screen. Yes, thank you. Okay, realizing I'm going to have to come up with another monitor by then. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the government department. What we call our committee, or I keep trying to call our committee. I'm not sure I've got a whole lot of pickups so far, but I keep trying to call it our assessment and learning committee because I really want to emphasize the links between these things. We are not a model, I should say. So it's funny that I'm on the panel. I kept saying, oh, we need somebody from COGOD on the panel because COGOD does this so well. There are a few things we do well. So I'm going to go over a little bit of our structure and then I'm going to get to what we do well, or what I think we do well. So we have a very large department and we have a large committee as a consequence. So we have about 6 members plus the department chair routinely on the committee. And the committee's been around since about 2012 when we realized we were in big trouble and weren't doing any assessment and needed to get in, underway and in a hurry and figure out what on earth we were going to do. We only meet twice a year. And so that's one of the things I would say we don't necessarily do particularly well, but we're also juggling a lot of different things. And so we are trying to minimize the impact on faculty. The committee chair tends to head the efforts, but I am that committee chair. I'm a member of COLA, but I'm also the head of the department's assessment learning committee, and we run assessment for 4 programs. That's a lot of material to collect. And so we have a departmental assistant who can help me coordinate the collection. So we put together a calendar after we did this a few years and a schedule. We've got to send emails out to people teaching this course this semester, and this month actually we have to do this, and then the next month we have to do that, and that actually has become kind of now almost automated. So I crafted emails that actually come from the chair's email, but the administrative assistant sends them, and he knows now who to send them to, and on the schedule on which to send them. So we work very closely together. I know not every department can rely upon staff in that way, but I'm also aware that we didn't necessarily want staff to be making this particular kind of request to faculty. There's a little bit of sensitivity around that, and so we made sure that the request was coming from the chair, and it's sort of faculty to faculty. And all members of the committee perform some of the assessments, although they're not the only people in the department performing the assessments. A note about our programs I've already alluded to. We're a large department. We're also, we have very large programs. So we have the 2 largest undergrads on campus. The BA in political science has 800 students in it. The BA in CLEG is some 400 students in it. And you can imagine then that's a lot for us to get a handle on. We also, I mentioned, assess 4 programs through our committee, which includes 2 master's programs, one of which is co-administered with the communications program, and so that requires interdisciplinary discussion. And we assess all of our learning outcomes each year at the moment, although after meeting with members of COLA who evaluated our annual reports this time around and said maybe you don't need to do all of them, I'm beginning to think about how we might revisit that. But in my experience, certainly as I was getting this started, it was really useful to do everyone every time, because the stopping and starting, getting it started again was so difficult. It was much easier to say, this is what we do and everybody does it, than to say, I'm turning it on and I'm turning it off. And people would say, well, I don't remember, geez, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. It's just easier for everybody to kind of have a common understanding that we're all supposed to do it every time. And it truly eliminated some of the administrative headache. About the way in which assessment is structured in our department, it took me a little while to figure out that this was actually what I was about. But I've come to sort of terms with the notion that part of what we're trying to do with the way in which we structured this, or I'm trying to do with the way in which I structured this, was to educate my colleagues. To teach them a little bit of the what and the why of assessment. I mean, as I mentioned, we were not doing assessment until almost a decade ago, and we were one of the last departments really to kind of, particularly the big programs, to get serious about this. And there was very little understanding of what assessment was for, or why we would be dragged into this, and a lot of skepticism about top down, or we're being directed to do this by outside authorities, whether it's middle states or COLA, the Senate, the provost, whatever. We're being told to do this, and thus we're not particularly interested in it. But the membership of our committee rotates, and that's very intentional. So it's maybe not as, we don't rotate as widely as we should, and there are other ways to improve upon what we're doing. I've tried to be quite humble about the fact that we're not a perfect model, but I do think part of bringing new faculty in has helped to make assessment much easier, because as more and more people in the department understand what assessment is for, they're more willing to participate in it, they're more willing to value it, they're more willing to kind of have these conversations that were rather difficult to have, to be honest, at the outset. I'm also aware that in composing the committee, I'm attempting to strike a balance between tenure line and term faculty. We know that term faculty tend to maybe have a different attitude about teaching and investment in teaching specifically. And so I also, I fiend that term faculty are sort of easier to get on the committee, also because I think some term faculty feel it's hard to say no. And so we really do try to strike a balance and make sure that we have across the department some familiarity and some engagement. also trying to balance faculty who teach grad students with faculty who teach undergrads, et cetera. A second purpose in structuring the assessments the way in which we have in the department is to create buy-in. And so I mentioned that we really weren't doing a whole lot of assessment before, and now you know, we're trying to get our faculty more willing to do this, and so certainly rotating that membership is useful, but also kind of explaining to them that what we're doing is a way to do assessment that minimizes impact on them. So, you know, we recently, because the AU Core created this capstone program that every, you know, department had to have or every program had to have a capstone. And, you know, we can't staff a standalone capstone course with, you know, 1,200 students going through our programs at the undergraduate level. We had to be a little bit creative about how we did this, and then to start. And so what we ended up doing was we made all of our 400 level courses capstone compliant, and we wanted to make sure that our faculty weren't trying to teach one course to some students who were taking it for their capstone and another course to other students who weren't taking it for their capstone. And then the faculty member is split in teaching capstone based skills and non to the different students. So we eventually ended up explaining to faculty that that was actually to make it easier for them. And so all of these things kind of work together in our understanding. And then, as you can imagine, because we have such a large faculty and we have so many courses, we're trying to use assessment and as I said, to do that end learning piece, right, is to connect the separate pieces of our curriculum to each other and connect our faculty to each other. So one of the first things we did at the very outset when we started thinking about assessment was realize that we needed common learning outcomes across the multiple sections of our very large intro classes, and even some of our middle range 200 and 300 level courses that are required courses for which we then have to run 10 sections or whatever. And we needed common learning outcomes so we could kind of have a consensus among ourselves about what the curriculum was intending with this course. And that's been a very useful thing for us. So we're doing things other than assessment, but we're using assessment to sort of achieve those things, which really point to enhancing student learning. So what I'm not going to so much talk about what we don't do well. I think that may be relatively obvious, but I would want to sort of emphasize, I think, a few things that I think we do well. For one thing, we use assessment to strengthen our sense of what we intend from our curriculum and our courses. So I'll give you an example. We have this required methods course at the 300 level. Yes, everybody rolls their eyes. It's one that students hate to take and the faculty don't necessarily love to teach, but because we rotate faculty through that course so often, it's very important that we run assessment every semester on that course. And the method that we use is we grab the low-hanging fruit, which is we ask the students to give an oral presentation. Now those things are recorded. They used to be in person. And then we have faculty evaluate a sample of these things across the different sections. And we needed a rubric with which to do that. We revisited our rubric 2 years ago. And that required a very robust series of conversations. I mean, Doga sort of mentioned, oh, you know, you get these lengthy debates, a very robust series of conversations. And I'm talking a couple hours around the table about what we were going to ask students to do in that class, and thus, you know, who we understood ourselves to be with regard to this requirement. That may seem very obvious to others outside, but when you have a department with 25, 30 faculty members, you know, it's difficult to arrive at consensus. And it was a very useful exercise for us. Assessment was a very useful exercise for us. It also has been used to help us focus our minds when we're making changes to our curriculum. So the comparative graduate faculty decided we no longer wanted to have our students take a comprehensive exam and instead to do you know, basically a capstone at the graduate level. And we had to kind of iron out what then that would look like and how we would evaluate it. So obviously we had to come up with a rubric there as well. And one of the things I was able to do as the assessment coordinator was to say, hey, we say we're going to assess, you know, that we want our students to be able to do these things, and we were measuring that through our assessment of the comp. Where are we going to see that in in this new assignment, and how are we going to evaluate it in the new assignment? So it kept us really focused on, what we said our goals were. And that's not to say that your learning outcomes can't change across a program. These are things that are supposed to be set by faculty and supposed to reflect, the faculty intentions with regard to what students should learn. It just kind of helped us sort of keep our benchmarks active and reflected in our curriculum. And then I also wanted to mention this notion that Mike referred to before about closing the loop. So we use assessment to change our teaching and our curriculum. In other words, to take whatever data, I'm a social scientist, I don't mind that word, Mike, that we gather through assessment and integrate it into our curriculum. And so a very specific example would be that very early on, we renumbered our methods sequence at the graduate level, because we were really struggling with, do you expose them to design first and then, give them the stats skills, or do you expose them to stats and then give them the design? And we went back and forth, and eventually we settled on a pattern, and we realized that our curriculum was numbered incorrectly, and so we had to fix that. But even in terms of actually changing how we teach. So when we introduced the AU core capstone requirement, our CLEG program has a capstone seminar. And when we evaluated it this past spring as part of our assessment to produce our annual report in the fall, the faculty who were assessing the capstone said, kind of get a sense that maybe we could instruct them a little bit better on this particular task. And so we all sat down with the guy who was teaching the course and said, would you be willing maybe to think about giving them some of this ahead of time early in the semester so it can be part of their instruction? I think we have some examples of making assessment work for ourselves so that it isn't so top down, and so that we see it as a way to enhance what we're doing at the department level and the separate programs. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kimberly. And again, I think that there's some interesting questions that we might come back to about I agree that kind of resistance to kind of top down that we often hear about assessment, and they're legitimate, that are worth kind of working through in the ways that you all have. Let me turn things over to Tracy.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to move along. I know we want to get time for some questions too, so let me just get my my slideshow ready to go. So you could all share my screen, right? See my screen. Okay, so I wanted just to make sure that we talk a little bit more specifically about what grounds our work, and I won't belabor our mission and vision and our commitments to anti-racism, but the School of Ed really works through all of our decision-making through those priorities. And so that's true with our work in assessment as well. If you're not familiar with the School of Ed, I just want to share a little bit about our program structure. We actually have a number of programs that are preparing educators for licensure. And so we have a lot of outside accreditation bodies that we report to. And there's a high level of accountability, and we could take the entire fair and conference day to go into the details, but that's not all of our School of Ed programs. So our teacher education programs and our building level principal certificate program have a heavy lift. And that's really why I have the role of accreditation and assessment coordinator, because of this work with licensure. But today, what we're really talking about is our unit-wide School of Ed focus on assessment. So we have this work, but we also, of course, have these really robust programs that we want to make sure are getting the assessment attention they need. So we have, our EPL programs, we have our international program, and knowing that our licensure programs are part of this larger School of Ed, we really need to think cohesively about assessment across the unit, and what does that look like, and how does that make sense for programs that are not necessarily engaged in licensure and those that are. So who's involved in this work? And it always starts with our leadership. Our deans have to be really prioritizing and supporting this work, which they do in the School of Ed. We do have my role of the accreditation and assessment coordinator, and I'm really kind of an organizer, cheerleader, supporter, a document person. But we really lean on our program directors for each of those programs to facilitate the assessment plans, and then the faculty in each program to engage in the reviewing and analysis and discussion around what that means for curricular decisions. We do have an assessment committee, but the assessment committee really focuses on organizing our data retreat, and I'll talk more about that, and thinking about supporting for tools for data collection. How can we get that work done? So the School of Ed assessment plan has 4 simple steps. I think simplicity, when you're talking about cohesiveness, is really the key. And we've really tried to engage everyone in the same number of steps. So establishing these learning outcomes. First is the foremost piece. We've all talked about that. We know COLA is supporting that work and that Middle States is looking for that. So just as a quick snapshot, here's an example of the programs in the School of Ed and just the titles of the learning outcomes that have been established for each one. And I'll just take one program, the teacher education program, to kind of drill down into what that looks like in terms of implementation, but it's mirrored in all of the programs. So every one of the learning outcomes has a descriptor. So what is it that students will be able to do in enacting and demonstrating that learning outcome? These were determined by faculty, and they are on our website. So our School of Ed website has the learning outcomes posted for each of our programs. So we want to continue to build this culture of basically telling students, this is what you'll leave with, and keeping it simple. Again, not kind of getting caught in the weeds about language around accreditation or some of that external benchmarking that we know matters, but we want to say to our students, here's what you'll leave with, nuts and bolts. So then what we do is the next thing after we've established those learning outcomes, which we have just recently accomplished as of last year, revisited and established, and some of our programs are newer than others, but we need to say, okay, what's the key assessment for each learning outcome? And it needs to be something that all students complete in the program. And so we were able to, again, just using one program example, say, okay, here's the key assessment for each learning outcome. These are not set in stone. Even as Kimberly mentioned, the learning outcomes might adjust over time, but certainly your key assessments might be added to or developed, because as you analyze them, you might start to see maybe these assessments aren't doing the work for you. But we have a placeholder for every key assessment, for every learning outcome in every program at this stage of our development. Next, we set up a schedule that for all the program faculty to be able to review one key assessment related to one learning outcome each semester. And so here's again, the example from teacher education. You can see that in fall of 21, our professional practice learning outcome, we looked at the data that we had identified would be our key assessment for that work and came up with some thoughts about that when we looked at the data. And can see in spring of 22, one of our learning outcomes is about anti-racist education. And we have an assessment that we'll be using and discussing. And we very might well, when we look at it, decide we need to make some changes, but we have a place for faculty to look at and engage with what we're using and how it's working for us and what it's telling us about our students learning toward that outcome. So when faculty do get together each semester, so program faculty have a meeting every month, and one of them on the agenda is dedicated, the item is dedicated to this work. And so with that, the first thing we're asking is, okay, is the assessment actually doing its job? Is it measuring the learning outcome? Can we count on the data? Is it normed if there are multiple instructors in different sections? Is this data useful? Is it really telling us what our students can do toward the learning outcome? What does the data actually tell us about their ability to make learning outcome? And then now what? So what? Are we changing things? Are we keeping things the same? And this is all through faculty discussion. And then we document that, so we make sure that everyone has an opportunity to say what changes will be made. The way that gets documented, these are the questions that are being documented, but the way that we go about doing that is the faculty program director is going to be able to click a Google survey that's been created for each one. And I think if I'm not getting over my skis, I wanted to try and show you one. So let me just click on one. And I think I can just go to a different screen share and give you just a quick peek. So for, again, teacher education, the program director will simply complete this after that faculty conversation, the date, which outcome was being looked at, which learning outcome, who was there, what was the key assessment that was looked at, which course is the key assessment in, and which of these steps were taken. And maybe you only got as far in the conversation as looking at the first question, is actually meeting the learning outcome, but hoping to be able to move all the way down to thinking about what might be the next steps, who's responsible for them, what's the timeline for them, and any other notes we want to make. So that's something that can be completed then each time. Am I back on my PowerPoint? Great. So that's the model. Every semester, there's a look at the learning outcomes key assessment, faculty conversation, decisions made. And I'll just briefly speak to the role of the assessment committee that I mentioned. We do have an annual retreat. So this was something we just started last May. So it's fresh, but we had a really successful experience. We did a save the date early and spent the spring semester really planning it. You're not going to be able to see the detail, but this was our agenda. We really spent the morning as a whole School of Ed talking about data, talking about assessment, talking about the purpose of assessment and meeting our mission and thinking about our priorities. And then we have different breakouts across mixed breakouts of faculty and staff discussing some of these key issues and generating questions for follow-up. And the afternoon was spent program specifically with separate programs looking at data on their own. And we all came back together at the end for a closing. And what we then generated from that was basically a report. And this is just the first cover and the table of contents of a report that summarizes the work of that data retreat, both to hold a spot of what we accomplished, but also to set our stage for the next one, to be able to take it to the next level and kind of track that we're moving across a continuum of development because we're growing our culture of assessment. So the last piece I just want to mention, and I won't go into the details now, but I've been really engaged with this, is that part of the assessment committee work was determining this data collection tool and how can we support the School of Ed in that work. And we've started working with a tool called Portfolium, which is actually connected to Canvas. It's not Canvas itself, but it's embedded in Canvas. So we can create rubrics in Portfolium, tag them for particular learning outcomes, for example, and then pull those into Canvas courses so they're sturdy and stay the same. So if we have multiple sections across multiple semesters, we can pull the data on that particular learning outcome and be able to see the results in a way that we could really analyze them and think about program improvement. So this is something that we're just starting this semester. I've been setting a lot of things up in teacher education because, again, we have a lot of robust reporting for that level of accreditation, but it's something that will be used as a tool for all of our programs as we continue to develop our key assessments for our learning outcomes and be able to track the data over time. So that's what I wanted to share about how things are working in the School of Ed.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. And I realize we have just a few minutes available, so we'd love to hear questions that you might have. I have some things that in really learning about the specific ways that different programs do this work, I always have questions, but what questions do you all have? Feel free to type them in the chat or raise your hand for any of our panelists here. And I can get us started. In fact, maybe I'll start off with Tracy. Again, thank you for sharing all that kind of that information about your process. Have you faced any kind of challenges in the assessment work, and have you kind of navigated those, if so?
Yeah, so I'm new to this role and new to this work. So for those of you at home who think, oh, I couldn't do that, you can. But the idea of sharing a unit-wide commitment and understanding of assessment, I think, is the first challenge. And I think that the way to address that is, as I noted, a really clear and simple plan. You know, we just have these 4 steps, this very simple schedule. You know, it's sturdy and it doesn't get confused as it translates into the different needs of the different programs. We really have programs at very different places. Some just struggling to begin to name learning outcomes, newer programs, some that are very adept at that and have already started using data. So having, again, those steps in place really allows you just to meet each program where they are and say, what's the next step for your program? And the final challenge that I'll note is really around time, like the resource we just cannot get enough of. And so thinking about kind of holding these very simple steps in a way that allow that you're not trying to do too much at once, and you can see the next step and you just kind of can very methodically persist in making sure the next step is accomplished in a way that doesn't feel like it's just too much. So really being cognizant of time and realizing that everybody can only bite off so much. So you can see where you're headed, you can see where you are, and you just keep moving.
I mean, I agree. That always seems to be the limiting factor and limiting resource, right? Is kind of time and focus and attention. And it makes me think a lot about, again, what I admire is that we have kind of experiences from really different sizes of programs and so forth, and the ways that that's structured. And I'm wondering then, like Jenny, since you're working in a smaller program than, let's say, Clegg or something like that, that Kimberly is, what can faculty members do even at kind of a smaller program to kind of get more involved in that assessment work, or what incentives are there to maybe doing this work, or what's your sense of that?
Well, in general, I think to get involved, the best way is probably, if you're not part of the committee yet, you should figure out who is on the committee, or at least who's in charge of assessment in your school. And for some of the big schools, you might not know because you don't necessarily talk to everybody every day. So you can always email your COLA representative. Any of us can figure out who's in charge of assessment for a specific program. So that would be one of the places you could go. You could also join COLA. Run for COLA next time there's a spot available in your school. So some assessments, we have like the obvious of, if you get involved, you could put that on FARS or whatever the new FARS is called. I forgot what it's called. But it can also help you with your own classes. Like if you start to look at assessment for the program and you see where some areas are struggling, if you actually cover that in some of your courses, you might realize like, oh, I need to do a better job or cover that more specifically, or maybe assess it more from the beginning so they know how important it is. And that can kind of help the overall program.
Awesome, thanks. Yes, I think we're always open to getting more rotation of committees and members of the Committee on Learning Assessment, the Senate. I realize we are out of time, so let me thank everyone for attending. I know Sakshi may have a few words she wants to share to kind of close us out, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for a wonderful session, everyone. So there's an evaluation link. It's present in the chat. Also, there's a QR code, so I can share my screen real quick. You can scan the code, and then here you can fill this form out. And thank you so much for any feedback. We really appreciate it because that would help us just improve our services. Thank you.